My guest today is neurodiverse couples coach Michelle Linford. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. Thrilled to be here.
I'd love to start off with explain a little bit about your childhood, how you grew up, childhood memories, and we'll go from there.
All right, that's a great place to start. I'm the oldest of four girls. I was raised in northern Utah in a city called Bountiful. Basically lived in the same house my whole life, starting about age 3, and very intense student. School was something I always valued and enjoyed, except for a little blip in the 6th grade. I played basketball in junior high. In fact, in elementary school, I was the girl not playing, jump rope and foursquare. I was over playing basketball with the boys.
Okay.
I always loved basketball. Thought that my dream was to play basketball in college, but ended up going definitely a different direction. But I loved it that much.
Okay. All my daughters are basketball players, so we love
That
it.
was the look on your face. Awesome. Yeah,
Yes.
it's fun sport. Ended up playing tennis in high school, so went a little bit more toward the individual sport. That's a family thing.
Mhm.
Now a lot of my time is spent playing pickleball. Started as a computer science major. I love math and science, but after the first semester, realized that I didn't really want to be spending my life looking for that missing semicolon in the code.
Sure.
Explored everything from computer science to family science in my college career, and finally, as a junior, declared psychology as my major. At that time, I knew I wanted to do something people oriented.
Hmm.
And it was general enough. It was like a starting point for me. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I did have 2 degrees, 2 options that I ruled out. One was business and the other was social work.
Hmm.
And now I ended up getting a master's in business, and I'm now pursuing a master's in social work. So a little bit of a
Now,
funny twist there.
how did you meet your Asperger's husband?
We both grew up in Utah, but after grad school, after my MBA, I went to New Jersey to start my career. And he had just finished his postdoc. Actually, I was there for 2 years before we met. He had finished his postdoc in Germany and moved to Pennsylvania. And mutual friends, a friend of mine connected with his mom, or his besties with his mom. And they both have 8 kids. And when they were talking about what their kids were doing, and Matt moved to Pennsylvania, and so my friend looked at my now mother-in-law and said, "We need to set him up with Michelle." And as they say, the rest is history. We started our family there and then moved to California and had our second child.
Now, what was the courtship like?
Very short.
How did he ask how was the proposal?
Do we have to answer that question?
You know what? It is funny how Asperger's men, looking
He
back,
proposed over
propose.
the phone.
Okay.
Yeah, I
And the
did.
honeymoon.
We went to Spain,
Okay.
actually. We both served missions for our church.
Wow.
I served in Argentina and he served in Uruguay. And so because we were both working professionals, we were like, once we have kids, this kind of travel is not going to be very easy. So we decided to go to a country neither of us had visited, and it was a place where we could speak Spanish. Although Spain Spanish is different, but it was fun. It was a fun challenge to adjust our ear to the vosotros and the theta.
Full
But yeah, we
immersion.
spent a week, kind of bought a tour package, and we were anchored in Madrid and then had day trips to different castles. And
What's his occupation?
when we first married, he was working in industry and then moved to small companies with some former colleagues of his from graduate school. And for the last 26 years, he's been a professor of chemistry.
Since you were first married, the level of affection and intimacy, how has that changed over the years?
I think the way I want to answer that question is it's more about how our relationship has changed and how knowledge about neurodiversity has influenced. Because I always like to say more neurotypical because we're all neurodiverse in different ways, right?
Hmm.
So language can be a little tricky, but I definitely came in with expectations of emotional closeness and, very similar things to what we often hear in neurodiverse couples. But now we're in a stretch of life that's a phase of life where kids are flown and grown, empty nesters, and there is a lot more companionate love that wasn't there before because we didn't know what we were dealing with. We didn't get a diagnosis until about 17 years in. I didn't really start wrapping my head around the dynamics of neurodiverse relationships until 25 years in because the resources just weren't there. I We were flying blind. And so it's we actually call what we're experiencing now our second marriage.
And how long have you been married?
It'll be 29 years this year.
Okay. And what were the signs that led the path to discovering your husband was Asperger's? I imagine usually it's the wife that picks up on it first, but what were the
No, I
signs?
didn't. I mean,
Okay.
now that I look back, it's like, why didn't that even cross my mind, you know? No, it was relational dynamics that were sucking the life out of both of us. And I sought therapeutic support, and kind of a crazy story how we found this therapist. But after it took a couple of years for her to finally say, "Hey, I think this is what it is." There weren't any psychometrics per se because this was a master's level therapist, so she wasn't licensed to do that, but she could see enough of the patterns that she's like, yeah, I think this is it.
And you were
And
in
one
couples therapy for this.
Well, it started as couples, but then we each went to individual therapy. So he was working with a therapist, I was working with a different one. She originally was going to be a couples therapist, but it just worked out better. And I don't think this is uncommon that each of us was working on our own process. And
Mhm.
in the course of that, she started to, she had enough time with him to see patterns and to say, I think this is what it is. And that was a big first turning point in our relationship.
What was your Asperger's husband's acceptance journey?
Rocky. At first, so he told me when that first came that he realized he had one of two choices. He could either use this as an excuse because, both of us knew that things weren't good in our marriage, or he could lean into it and learn from it. And that was his initial stance. And I really believe in brain plasticity, and I saw shifts in him as he was working with his therapist to build skills and, eye contact and things like that, that on the face of it can seem very basic unless you understand how neurodiverse brains can work. Of course, everybody's different, but there are trends and patterns that we can talk about. And then for a while, I think this is also very common that there was some hesitancy. I feel like the merging of Asperger's into a full spectrum actually did a disservice to ASD1 individuals because, and I'm not saying that the stigma of ASD2, 3, that's okay, that we need to be treating people with dignity no matter what.
Sure.
And ASD1 is a different diagnosis, though. Sometimes called high functioning, sometimes that's not really something that feels acceptable these days, because we don't want to label someone as low functioning. But when we're talking about capacity, and, my husband's brilliant, a brilliant scientist, top of his field, mentoring students, just thriving in his special interest areas. I think there was a part of him that just started to resist it because A, he doesn't want to be put in a box, which is completely legitimate. And B, he sees autism as that label as fitting more in the ASD2 or 3 level,
Sure. The Rain
that
Man
his high
kind of.
intelligence, I mean, in fact, the first therapist that I found who understood and addressed neurodiverse relationships and appreciated and respected the experience of each partner, she helps with neurodiversity and with high intelligence individuals. And that's my husband,
Sure.
the combination. And so I think has felt sometimes degraded and boxed in. And so there's been some resistance, and I think that's understandable.
Well, and what we found is men who are very super successful, and you can look at Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Stephen Jobs, they really don't want to be called autistic for all the reasons that you said. But for my acceptance process, I wanted all the positives because there are a lot of positives,
It's like
especially when it comes
superpower
to
stuff.
success.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we can go out and conquer the world, but yet our wives are feeling emotionally starved. And that's what kind of the dilemma is. But what do you recommend for women that have husbands like yours that still haven't gotten hold, the husband's not into that acceptance yet? What would you recommend? Pointing out the positives? How do you gently nudge him to getting help?
So it's a great, I don't know if you saw the big smile. This is where my heart is helping the spouses. And often we're talking, it's not always, but often we're talking about a husband who is on the spectrum and a wife who is baffled. As, for example, I typically work with ASD1 individuals and couples in that situation, baffled by the brilliance at work and the high capacity and the confusion of how the capacity doesn't seem to transfer
Hmm.
at home. So I have a great deal of compassion and empathy, true lived experience empathy. And what I like to share in my coaching is to bring the focus back here. When there is that lack of connection and confusion, that 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 pushes us into a fight or flight mode very often. We kind of kick into I call the amygdala is driving the bus, you know. There's
Hmm.
sort of this panic, and then we're trying to get more of what we really want, but that energy is only going to overwhelm our husbands. That's going to overwhelm that's going to not work with any human. But when someone with autism who may struggle with the emotional and relational elements of life, especially like the closer you get to somebody with autism, the more stress there is for them. So, relationships at work can stay at work. They can stay work oriented. There's less of at home. This is where the most emotional and relational demands exist. And that's
Hmm.
not because we're wrong in having those desires. But if we want, like, what do we really want? We really want an improved relationship. Well, nothing's going to hurt a relationship more than turning towards somebody, finger pointing and demanding that they do something. We have to understand what they can do and how they process it and really start to understand their world. But even before that, I I actually run a free support group for wives, and we focus on ourselves. We focus on how we can build our own capacity and groundedness so that we're living in our prefrontal cortex instead of in our amygdala, where
Hmm.
we are learning self regulation tools and principles for our own nervous systems. Then, when we've built that capacity, then we can start thinking about how do we want to engage our relationship. Because regardless of where our spouses are, if we find some healing, find some support, find some translation to help us understand what's going on in our world, that most of the time this is not personal. It feels personal, or it can feel personal, but it really isn't, because it's just neurobiological. It's like, if I have an iPhone,
Hmm.
and I tease, we have sort of this thing in our family that we tease the people with the Androids, right? Because they don't talk to each other. So it's the green bubble thing, right?
Right.
Like a neurodiverse wife wants that blue bubble, but the operating systems are different, and it is what it is. So how do we work with those different operating systems rather than what I did for so long? Expect him to be a blue bubble guy.
Hmm.
And yeah, go ahead.
And how does that work? Because you go into a coaching situation, a therapy situation. So you've got the husband that's the quote logical thinker. Wife's typically treated as the emotional thinker. And how does those two connect? Because I have to translate things into tasks. I have to learn things. I'm emotionally blind. But yet the wife also then has to learn to translate things into his language. And there's a compromise. It'll never meet. But can we bring a few things together? What are
Absolutely.
your thoughts on that?
So that is the quest. That's the quest within a neurodiverse relationship. Through the conflict mediation training that I've received, I just completed a transformative conflict mediation training. So I'm now a certified mediator. A mediator not in just problem solving that's more transactional. We really want to help people build capacity to manage conflict in their lives, because contention's a problem, but conflict is normal. It's a
Sure.
human reality. And I think that this applies in a neurodiverse relationship. The conflict comes with the disconnect of the different neurotypes. And so I like to combine different models from my certification as a neurodiverse couples coach and this conflict resolution mindset, where I like to give each person a chance to have time to be heard one-on-one. So instead of bringing the couple together at the same time, because they're already used to talking past each other, I want to give each of their nervous systems a chance to just be heard without fear of what the other person's going to say or how they're going to respond or how I might respond to what my husband would say, just to give them that dignity of being able to share where they're coming from. So that's my, but you looks like you have a question.
Well, in conflict resolution, don't you find, and we've had this with our coach, is I'm talking about an event that we had an argument, and Teresa's talking about the argument, and the coach is listening to us, and literally the coach can say, are you guys talking about the same thing?
Right.
It's
Yep.
totally, do you have an example of that either personally or something that's just,
Gosh.
and
Like,
how to resolve that? How do you?
so yeah, so I think I'll get there as I share a little bit of the method. That first, letting each person be an individual, right? And letting them have their say. Once you hear from each person, you kind of get a sense, you can get a sense for their lens on the experience, on the situation. Sometimes it is event driven. We've had those kind of situations where he's been triggered by something and he'll come in and he just wants to vent. Well, it's not good for me to be in that situation when he's venting because I've already heard, or vice versa. I have a concern and he's tired of feeling punched not violence, you know what I'm saying? Being told over and over and over again, you're not doing it right. You're not doing it right. That's the message that he gets. So I like to start with each person as an individual. And in the conflict resolution process, each person then is invited to, okay, you've shared what the situation is. What do you want? What goals do you have? And how is what you're doing now serving toward those goals? And being able to start to invite each person alone on their terms in language that can work for them, not first with each other, but first just with me, so that they can start to think in a way that works for them. Well, what I really want. So I'll give an example of an interaction that we had. We do a lot of divide and conquer. So because of the disconnect, and for 25 years, really, even though we had the diagnosis, we didn't have the tools to address a neurodiverse relationship. So for about 25 years, we're flying blind. And that does not work well in a neurodiverse relationship. You default to survival mode. So we've found some things that worked, and one was like he'd take the morning shift, I'd do afternoon and evenings because our circadian rhythms are different. So, and divide and conquer allowed us to come together around the well-being of our kids. So we didn't know how to navigate our relationship, but we knew we were both committed to helping support our kids in their lives. And so we used that divide and conquer. To me, it's another version of parallel play, the parallel body doubling kind of thing, except we weren't body doubling at the same time. We were multiplying our impact to care for our kids, and that got us through the child rearing years. Now that they're flown and grown, we're trying to navigate, okay, who does what, and just some of those practical things. Well, he typically takes care of car things. Okay, so the oil change light just came on my car, and I left him a note and left him the key and said, can you please take care of it? And I woke up to a looped car. We had a car situation with my van where the windshield wiper, there was some stuff going on in the mechanism of the windshield wiper that I said, can you go take care of this? And he freaked out. And, in other situations, I would have joined him in the freak out and reacted. But because I was trying to use this fairly newfound knowledge, I said, okay, it looks like something just happened there. Are you feeling overwhelmed? Is this something that you actually need me to do? It cracked open the opportunity for him to be able to tell me what was going on. And because I made it safe, it opened his capacity to do that. And he said, I want to please you. So there's his goal.
Tasks. I'll please you with tasks.
Yep. There's his goal. I want to please you. But this task to him felt too complicated. He was worried about failing and not pleasing me. Now, his wanting to please me goal definitely didn't come translating, because when he's triggered, he kind of comes at me. So it was so fascinating and so instructive for me to understand that he may not have the words. He may not in that moment have the capacity to name what's going on, but deep down, he wants this to work, and he wants me to be happy. But the overwhelm for him is he doesn't know how to do that. Instinctively, he doesn't know how to do that. And so, being able to start to translate, like I went back and stumbled on an old email where this was again before I knew about neurodiverse relationship tools, methods, models, principles. I was asking him for, I need you to do and be this and that, very typical neurotypical demands. And he wrote back and he said, I don't know that I can do that. All I know to do is to show you that I love you, like
Sure.
what you say, through tasks. And I didn't understand it then, but after learning, I went back to that email. I said, that's where I have contributed to what I call the dance of death. That, I expect him to work on iOS when his system's Android, or we can flip it either way, right? And then I feel that resentment that he doesn't have the same operating system because I didn't have the language to understand that was going on. It
Sure.
wasn't personal, even though his coping strategy can make it sound personal. But deep down, he's like, I'm scared. I'm scared that this isn't going to work and you're not going to be happy, or I'm going to come back and find out that I did it wrong.
Or you're going to criticize.
Yeah.
And I take criticism as an attack.
Well,
And
or even just, oh, that wasn't quite, it doesn't even have to be criticism,
an
even the perception of, I didn't do it right. I didn't do it right. And so it is like, my husband is, one of his special interests is languages. He speaks several languages. And it's like, we need translation. We speak two different, our brains speak, our nervous systems, our brains speak two different languages. And so we have to find a language that works. And so this is, in answer to your question, it's kind of a long way to get to it, but I like to work with individuals, and very often I'm only working with the wife. Sometimes, like, I do have a client who is on the spectrum. Most of my clients are women because the husband isn't there. They aren't wanting to do the couples work yet, which is understandable. The way my husband described it is that he would feel ganged up on because he's not tracking. Yeah. He's not tracking in the same way because I'm speaking relationship and emotion with the therapist, and we've got that common language, and he's the outsider, or feeling like the outsider, but not wanting to admit that, but also not tracking, and then feeling like he's made out to be the bad guy. That's one of the reasons why I really spent so much time working on myself, because it's all I can do. I can't control him. And when I try, first of all, it's wrong, but secondly, it backfires. So if you try to control somebody into what you want, you're going to get less of what you want. So again, what do you really want? And are you willing to learn together how to work toward what you really want, given the fact that you have different neurotypes? So I can help each or one, so I'll speak to my typical way, help the wife learn more about pattern observation in the relationship and how the neurodiversity shows up and when and how it creates this. So we can build a new tool set for engaging that comes from a grounded place inside. And if the two people are willing to work together, then I use a concept from the book You and We by Jim Farrell. It's called the space between. So I've got my needs, my husband has his needs, and for most of our marriage, we were at war over whose needs matter most. And it can become a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
Right? It's not that people's needs don't matter, but a relationship is its own entity. And so the way I'm trying to approach it with my husband is say, okay, what's the we? What is this space between that neither of us owns that we can co-create in a way that works for us? So one of the things that we do is we co-work. We're in the same room, he's working on his stuff, I'm working on mine. Sometimes we'll chat back and forth, share a joke, whatever. But that parallel play is now satisfying to me because I understand that this is love.
Yeah.
Him wanting to be in the same room with me is love. And I can receive it as such because I've learned to translate so that I'm not expecting, well, but you have to be sitting by me, but we have to be, whatever. Like, no, he can be. I want to give him agency and space to show up in a way that works for him. And I work to receive. And I receive his offering.
Sure. I've got a question on going back to about those two tasks about the windshield wiper was broke versus oil changes. For me, I know routine tasks I can help out with laundry and I can help out with this. I can even organize things. But then my wife says, oh, there's a leaky faucet. And I'll be like,
And you're
okay,
like,
let's call the plumber. And it's something that, and there was a time when we couldn't afford a plumber. So I have to watch YouTube videos to figure it out. But it's one of those things that, especially with a husband like yours, oh my gosh, this brilliant man can't figure this out. And the thing about, quote, emotional blindness, and I'm aware of the concept, is that I can be destroyed by my wife. I can feel really bad and just like, you know, if my wife, you know, says I'm not doing something right or criticizing me, you still got to do that or bugs me. And it's just one of those things that's different about us. I can do some routine tasks and other simple tasks. I get really frustrated and that can elevate to a meltdown or a lot of
right,
frustration. And then I
right,
say things I shouldn't say.
right. And I've seen in a lot of the support groups that women don't necessarily like this facet of it. Like, oh, well, then I'm having to carry more of the emotional load and whatever. But the reality is the emotional load is greater when we're at war. And so learning to, imagine if I'll think of my aunt when she was 19, she was in a car accident and ended up being thrown out of the car and broke her
Mm.
back and paralyzed from the waist down.
Ugh.
Like expectations in a relationship with somebody who's been through something like that would have to change, right? And there is an adaptation that needs to happen really from both parties, but the neurotypical person probably has a larger reserve at the starting point to be able to make some change. And we live in a world where individual needs often trump everything. That's not a relationship. A relationship is not a vehicle to get my needs met. A
Mm-hmm.
relationship is a co-created thing. And you can again do the needs based, but then if they don't gel, then you're at war and it's a him versus her
Sure.
versus a him plus her, right?
Now, have you had situations where your Asperger's husband, you had a tragedy in your life and he didn't respond emotionally
Yeah,
appropriately?
I was asked to speak at my grandmother's funeral. This was the first like, my grandparents lived, all of them into their 80s. We both had all 4 of our grandparents at our wedding. So this was my first major loss with someone in my world, and I was asked to speak at her funeral. And my husband had a business trip and didn't, there was no connective anything. It was like, "Well, I've just gotta go do this." And it focused on the task
Mhm.
rather than the relationship. I'm not saying that he should have canceled his trip or whatever, but there wasn't any indicator, there wasn't any recognition that, hey, this is kind of a big deal, you know.
Mhm.
How do you feel about me travel? There was never
Sure.
that conversation.
Well, and one of the things that I think with me has helped is, let's say I was in that situation, and if I had to go to my coach, and if I was told, "Patrick, were you aware that that could be just hurtful to your wife for not doing that?" And many men would honestly say, "Wow, I
Yeah, I
didn't
had
even
no
realize, I was
idea.
clueless. Didn't have was that idea." So it's one of those things where men don't I think there's a big difference between being intentionally vicious to your wife, calling her names and being mean, but then there's so much unintentional pain that I think new neurological pathways can be created. And next time I can learn, my wife's brother died in a car accident. And I went to, okay, what are the kids going to do? We got to do this. Let's make funeral arrangements. And just went into task mode, not knowing that that was, emotionally devastating for my wife. But how can men kind of pick up on this stuff? And for me, it learns, are you aware that you said this and it was harmful to your wife? No, but now I know.
And for a wife to learn and this is again where coaches and therapists can be helpful, I think, to help build some tools and capacity, lens and language, but how do you approach something if there are hurt feelings, you know?
Hmm.
There's a lot of responsibility on the wife to share it in a way that is not in the moment of anger, that is in a language that he can understand, and that they're with the acknowledgement that this isn't intentional.
Sure.
That there are probably a few men who are more intentionally harmful, but when we're talking about the typical neurodiverse relationship, no, it's the different language sets and the different operating systems. And another tool in conflict resolution, transformative conflict resolution, is to create some sort of something that allows you to externalize the situation. So I have some bendable rubber, figure things that you can suction cup onto your table.
Okay.
Something like that where you can say, "Show me what it feels like for you when you guys are getting along versus, what does that look like? Or you can do what's called family sculpturing, where you can take chairs and use them to demonstrate how the relational dynamics feel, either in a certain situation or just in general,
Hmm.
so that you're looking outside of it instead of somebody talking at their partner, which feels like an attack. And really it is,
Hmm.
right? If we are criticizing our partners, even in front of somebody else, that's still going to be felt and experienced as an attack for most people. Neurotypical or neurodiverse, right? That's just a human thing. But if we can find something outside of ourselves to talk around, okay, well, this is how I feel. So I'm going to move the chairs like this, or I'm going to move these little suction cup figures, or I'm going to create this in clay, or I'm going to draw a
Sure.
diagram, something that allows us to get out. Then we're getting out of our amygdala and moving more into the prefrontal cortex because we're analyzing it more objectively. I
Sure.
sometimes call that putting on the lab coat and glasses. Like, get curious and look at the data, but don't be emotionally connected to it.
Hmm.
Practice that skill, because all of our nervous systems need that practice and that rewiring to not react,
Hmm.
because that's bypassing our brain. That's
Hmm.
bypassing the thinking brain.
Okay. Asperger's husbands and masking. Many say, someone like your husband who is tremendously successful, he's out there speaking in front of people, he's dynamic. I think there's a lot of pastors that are like this,
Yeah.
that they can be just charming and just to their congregation and speak in front of people. And then at home, they clam up and they're a different person. And a wife sometimes will refer to that as masking. But I know in my case, I'm just flowing in my passion. I don't think it's because it's not exhausting me. I would associate masking with something that's exhausting. I don't like my occupation and this and that. But what are your thoughts on kind of masking? And in that situation, a wife thinks, oh, you're just so happy. You're just masking to the masses.
I really like the distinction that you're making. If we can, I think there's probably a both and here.
Hmm.
That if somebody is in their special interest, it's a safety zone, right? Like, he's the expert in the room and he's an amazing teacher, a mentor in the lab, unlike any other. I mean, he is so good at what he does. And there's a relational work there, right? But he gets to be the teacher. He's the one who knows what's happening and can help other people get there. When he comes home, he's not that expert. He's outside of that comfort zone. And
Hmm.
that is a threat to his neurology, That puts him in more of a self-defensive mode. And I've come to, and you can tell me how you experience this, but my perception in the education I've received and just observation in the last couple of years as I've been doing this more intensively is that the world is designed for neurotypical people. And
Hmm.
so by design, a neurodiverse person is going to be on edge a lot more than most of us because
Sure.
you're living in Bulgaria and you speak Japanese, like
Sure.
there just isn't that crossover. And so, but you have, that's where the masking comes in, where you have to pretend that you get this world. But yeah, I can understand and have felt what you're describing, that women can feel, it can feel almost like a betrayal. Like, why don't I get that guy when you're at home? Well, it's because home isn't the safety zone.
Sure.
And
Well,
so
and
then
with
there's that, I don't know how to do this, but I don't want to say that I don't know how to do this because then I'll look stupid, but I don't get it. And they want to please their wives. My husband says, I want to make you happy. But it's basically he's saying, I don't know how. I don't know how to translate who I am into a world that makes sense for you.
Well, and then a wife can feel, especially older in years, a husband like yourself, who, oh my gosh, all these people love him and adore him, say he's compassionate. That can just build so much resentment in a wife that you don't even want to hear him speak. You don't even want to go to the events. You don't want to see him gushed on
Right, right.
because it just almost is like it just adds to the pain of a wife
It
seeing it.
can. And that's why I like working with wives, because we can engage in intentional healing work so that our brains and become more plastic, and we are able to reframe that and realize and celebrate the fact that he has places where he can thrive and not translate it as a betrayal, because he can't translate that at home
Hmm.
in the way that, we have most of our pain whoever we are comes from the stories that we're telling ourselves. So the story I used to tell myself, well, I had something like this recently happen where somebody said, "Oh, your husband," and I'm like, I could receive that because it's true.
Hmm.
In the zone where he is, they're right. And I can know for myself that yes, I have a different experience, but I don't have to resent that now because I understand. And
Hmm.
because I've worked on my own healing so that I don't have to have him show up in a certain way for me to be okay.
Sure.
And I am continually building the capacity to receive what he can give rather than focusing on what he doesn't do. Because who
Sure.
wants to be treated that way? Nobody does. I don't care what your
Sure.
neurotype is. That doesn't feel good.
Do you think his identity was tied to his occupation, and how was the transition to retirement?
He's not retired. I don't know that we'll ever retire. We both love our work, and this is why we chuckle that yeah, we're kind of weird, but
Because I really think if the Asperger's husband is self-employed, my stepdad just was forced to retire from a law firm. He was the longest serving partner in a law firm here in town, and he loved it. I mean, that was his identity in the community. He was great at it. And for those that I also have the flip side where men are forced to retire at 65 due to their occupation, and it can be devastating that you're all of
well,
a sudden.
that's true across the board, right? I mean, the
Mhm,
research shows that people who don't stay active and have some meaning in retirement, they don't do well.
mhm,
That's true for anybody.
sure.
When you have also the special interest safety zone and that's taken away, I think that that can definitely exacerbate the experience of someone in retirement. So to me, the advice is the same, right? Like keep staying involved in things that bring meaning for you, that work for you.
With your Asperger's husband, did it ever come to a point where you said, you need to get help or else?
Yep,
And
we've
you might not have said
definitely
you're leaving, but my wife had to say, I can't live like this. I can't live like this. I thought she was going to leave me. She now says no. But what if for a wife is at that point to where you get help or else I'm leaving? What does a wife do?
yeah, we had some in-house separations. We actually had a physical separation because and the way I understand it for myself and the approach that I took and the reason, again, yes, I can say you need to change or else, but that's a threat. Right? Like it takes a pretty exceptional human to be able to take a threat and turn it into a positive. Most people when they're threatened are going to self-defend. And that's our shared humanity, right? For me, my nervous system needed a rest because of the disconnects and the way that his survival mechanism was more of a fight,
Hmm.
that he'd kind of come after me and that part, the lack of the diversity in emotional connection styles is a challenge, right? But it wasn't that. I can live with that, but it was the lack of self-awareness around coping strategies and the hurtful coping strategies that he was blind to. And so I took a break because my nervous system needed that rest because I was losing my identity.
I've
I
got a
I
question on that.
yeah, go ahead.
What did the therapeutic separation with your husband look like? And how was it structured?
In-home separations were when he would come home from work, he would go downstairs. And because he goes to bed early, there wasn't a lot of time between home arrival and bedtime. And that way I could focus on my superpower, which was being a mom,
Hmm.
and nurture my kids.
How old were your kids when this happened?
Different ages happened several times through their upbringing. The physical separation happened after they were out of the house.
But the initial one happened when they were young enough to kind of know what's going on.
Yeah, that part was hard, but I also didn't want them to be in the presence of the kind of tension and contention that was so common. It wasn't good for any of us. And but then we did, when we would have conversations about what needed to happen, that divide and conquer was the thing that we could externalize so that we weren't having meta discussions about our relationship. We were talking about the needs of our kids. So we united around that shared goal, which is that we space.
Hmm.
That's what
I've,
kept us married.
I've got a question.
Yep.
How did your husband agree to this in-house separation?
Uh, I think he could just sense that's where I was. He wasn't happy about it, but he went along with it.
Have you ever implemented an in-house separation for clients?
Not to date.
What would be, because and there's specialists that specialize in therapeutic separations. It's on the doorstep of divorce, what I would refer to it as. But what does it do for a wife that you can just, I need my brain, my system to re-energize, and you separate, and maybe the husband, if there's a second home, he has to leave for the weekend for a month just so you can catch your breath. How important is that?
It will totally depend on the person. And I think so you say it's a stepping stone to divorce. I would say it could go either way. It can actually be a stepping stone to healing. The
Sure.
idea, if it's going to be constructive, there can be a reactive approach, which is, I can't stand you, get out of my face.
Hmm.
And that's an attack. So that's going to perpetuate the problem, because how are you going to solve anything if you're just pushing it away in a corner, pushing him away in a corner, right? There's a difference between that and some intentionality to say, okay, all of this contention is wearing me out. I need to regroup. And during that time, I was seeking healing support in multiple
Hmm.
ways. So I was working on myself and on my healing during that time. I wasn't simply pointing a finger at him and saying, you change or else, because I recognized that when I'm in my high alert, I'm not a pleasant person to be with. I don't handle things well, right? Who does? Nobody handles things well
Sure.
when they're in their amygdala. So that if I were to support somebody in that, that would be the conditions that I would encourage. That, okay, if you're doing this as a weaponization,
Hmm.
you're writing on the wall about where this
Sure.
relationship's going to head. And if somebody is at that point, what's the point of separation?
Sure.
Is that a preparatory time toward divorce or whatever? Like, it can be a cooling off period to assess if
Yes.
that's really what you want. But if that time isn't used intentionally, it's not a therapeutic separation.
Now,
It's
with your therapeutic separation, did you have nights to where you were, living in the same house, but you slept in separate rooms, you didn't communicate? What
good
was
question.
you dinner? How was dinners?
I have health issues and a sleep disorder, so we haven't slept in the same room for a long time because he snores and I'm a super light sleeper, and I have like a chronic fatigue thing where if I don't sleep, I can't function. So
Mm, I see.
so that part of it made it easier for sure.
Okay. When did you know that this was kind of the healing process? We can kind of withdraw from that or take it down a notch. What were the signs there? And how did he change? What were the benefits that you could
Yeah,
noticeably
we
see?
we've had ups and downs with that. I think for me, and the reason we're still married is because I know his heart. I like to say I married him for a reason. So like going back to who is he really? Like we courted mostly on the phone because we were in different states. So we
Hmm.
would spend hours each night. It was a short courtship, but it was very intensive. It was compact. If you think about the time you go on a date and you go watch a
Hmm.
movie, whatever, like you're not interacting a lot of that time. We were having hardcore, bottom up, inside out kinds of conversations about who we are, what we want in life, and, really doing that values match. And that's why I married him,
Sure.
because at the core, there was so much. That's always how I dated. I dated from the
Hmm.
inside out.
Sure.
And so that true self
Hmm.
from him is what would always bring it back to, okay, let's give this another try. But see, at that time, we didn't have the tools and knowledge. So we
Sure.
didn't have a way to translate our different operating systems. And so invariably, we would fall back into old patterns. And if you don't infuse something new to help change the patterns will win.
Sure. I've got two
So,
more topics I want to cover,
okay,
and
go
then
for it.
I'm pushing time. I recently interviewed an author of a book regarding Cassandra syndrome, and she
Yep.
interviewed women regarding Cassandra syndrome. And she said 80% of the women divorced where the husband didn't eventually accept the Asperger's and ask for help. What can women do in those situations to either deal with it at the same time, apply pressure to their husband to get help?
So, my personal approach is to stay away from the idea of applying pressure because it will only intensify the dynamic. It will only intensify the risk of flooding in the neurodiverse partner. I go back to, okay, Cassandra syndrome, whatever we want to call it, this dynamic is real. This impact is real. So let's help you heal.
Hmm.
And in relationships, if one person changes, the system changes. And I like to say that the best boundaries are action oriented, not words oriented. So it's like, okay, things aren't working the way they are.
Hmm.
I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to work on myself. I'd love to work on this with you. Right now, it sounds like you're not there, but I am going, and that's what I did.
Sure.
And what I discovered in that process is I can reach a point where even if he doesn't check this, and this box for my needs or whatever, I'm okay because
Sure.
I've established a foundation within myself and I have healed from the impacts of Cassandra where I don't trust myself and I absorb his narrative about me or
Hmm.
whatever. No, I can, my therapist calls it individuate from that, get clear on who I am. I always start with a values core, like who are you
Hmm.
and who do you really want to be? And work from there in a healing process and to essentially like let the relationship go for a while.
Hmm.
Very often in Cassandra mode, women double down on gotta fix the relationship, gotta fix the relationship, gotta fix the relationship without realizing that they are contributing to that dance.
Hmm.
And regardless of what happens with the relationship, if you leave that relationship and you don't have healing tools for yourself, then you're still going to have to do healing
Sure.
work. So why not do it before you end your marriage so that you can come with a clearer head in terms of making decisions about the relationship?
Sure. Asperger husbands and arguments. For me, we've got a rule that just arguments can't last more than 5 minutes. There's no
That's
sense in
good.
going back and forth. And I used to get really mad when it would just escalate and I would get a meltdown and say things I shouldn't. But just to have it to where there's rules like this and different rules for arguments or fight rules, whatever you want to call them. But what has helped me is just we limit it to 5 minutes. And I don't really like the timeouts. Let's revisit this in an hour or something. I want to get it settled now. But
Mhm.
I've got my opinion. My wife has her opinion, and maybe we disagree on the punishment for a child or whatever. And then we have a coach to go to if it escalates. But what about arguing with Asperger's? That's very frustrating for women. And what's the helpful tip for that?
So the advice I give and what I try to practice is again looking at myself. What am I contributing to the dance?
Mm.
Because trying to come up with co-created solutions doesn't always work. So I mean, awesome. You guys came up with your own. If there's a lot of contention, and since I'm working mostly with wives right now, I like to say, okay, what boundaries are you going to have with yourself
Hmm.
to not engage? To recognize, you start to pattern watch. You say, that just takes us down that spiral. It's a waste of my life force and energy. I don't want to do this to him either because none of us is pretty when
Sure.
we don't look good when we're in an argument, right?
Exactly. Yes.
So 5 minutes to me would, if we did that, I think it would just not work because
Hmm.
resolution is desired and we're both so stuck in whatever our lens is.
Sure.
So I use the idea of putting on that lab coat and glasses,
Hmm.
looking at the pattern, understanding what it looks like for you. When it shows up, say, yeah, I'm going to take a break from this conversation right now
Sure.
and just walk away. The other thing that I like to, the other analogy that I use is going to Las Vegas. So we have the dance of death, which is that collusional downward spiral that happens very quickly and can last forever. And we say things we regret and all of that. What do I really want? Right? That is not what I really want. It's not about being right. It's about wanting to stay in relationship. The other analogy that I use is going to Las Vegas. If I engage trying to change his mind about anything, we could be talking about current events. We can be talking about whatever. It
Difference
could
of
even be
opinion.
something, yeah, it could be something really meaningless.
Hmm.
But we're both really bright people. We're both strong willed. And if I think that I'm going to engage in a conversation, if he already has expressed his opinion and I try to change his mind, that's going to Las Vegas. Or if I'm trying to get him to get it, if I want him to understand something emotionally, if I'm talking at him, I think I'm going to get a positive result. I might as well take $50,000 to Vegas and see if I can get something. I mean, really, the
Right.
odds are that
Sure.
good.
Yeah.
So I
Rolling
try
the
to
dice.
avoid the dance of death. I try to avoid the dance of death. It's still a practice. I'm not saying I have it all figured out, but I know that this is the way I want to go, because the dance of death hurts, and going to Las Vegas is a waste of my life force and increases the problems. It doesn't help.
Sure.
If I need
Last time.
if I need to be seen, I'll go to my support people and say, "Hey, I just need to be heard right now." I don't try to make him be my primary emotional support, because he's in it. So I can seek support from my support people so I can come back more fresh to the relationship.
Sure. Last topic.
Okay.
Asperger husbands and sexual intimacy. And this is a topic I think especially gets older, gets more serious. But for me and the clients that we work with men, I had to turn sexual intimacy into a task. And this sounds
Mhm.
bad, but my wife has a way of telling me orgasms start when you wake up in the morning. I mean, it's something that it can be a touch, a hug. You've got to work your way up. And for me, why my wife's an athlete, I love to massage her, and we get massage oils. And for me, that can be very arousing, which can lead to sexual things, but it's just a task. We started taking showers together and massaging her. Now, I think sometimes I really think, oh my gosh, I'm doing this. It's a task. And then sometimes I really kind of get into it emotionally and sexually. But it's something like, what are tasks an Asperger's husband can do that a wife can feel touched and hugged and appreciated? And even if it doesn't rise to the level of sexual intimacy, she still feels wanted.
So I actually, first of all, this is totally going to depend on the couple, because what I'm seeing is you either have you usually have a higher desire, lower desire spouse. Okay. Jennifer Finlayson Fife has some great work on this. And an Asperger's person is very often either more in the hyper sexual mode or hypo. Like, there isn't a lot of in between,
Mm,
at least from what I'm seeing, just case studies across thousands of these, experiences that we see in different groups, right? I'm just observing a lot. And so again, if we can talk from a level of neurotype first to understand and help the couple unravel and unpack some of
mhm.
those neuro differences, then they can find, if they feel like they're on the same page, then there can be some working to find that we to say, hey, this works for me. But you know what? The the autism spouse also needs to be heard. I'm a woman, I understand, but a lot of what we're talking about is also just male female. There are a lot of jokes out there about, from
Sure.
it's not about the nail, if you've seen that, where men can get fixated on, like a woman's brain has the corpus callosum that's more connected. There are just some biological differences regardless. So to me, again, I try to avoid putting people in a situation where it's his versus hers, his needs versus hers, where they can learn together to co-create an ours, so that, because resentment's going to build either way if they're at war with each other, like my needs matter than yours, or your needs are getting in the way of mine. Or we want couples to be on the same side facing the world, not at war with each other.
Absolutely. Well, I certainly appreciate your time. If people want to take advantage of your resources, or what services do you offer?
I offer support for each individual if they want that. So for an autistic, again, most of my clientele is in the ASD1 world. I am not trained in an ASD2 or ASD3 level. There are different kinds of therapies and occupational therapy and other support that I am not certified to help with. So
And what are your certifications?
I received a certification from the Association for Autism and Neurodiversity Education, AANE, one of the foremost organizations in this space. I'm listed in the directory at AANE as the only coach in Utah, actually. There are, I believe, 3 therapists who are AANE trained, and I'm the only coach who's trained. And like I mentioned, I am also a certified mediator. And so I can help with conflict resolution skills in a way that's constructive, instead of, you're on your way to divorce, figure out how to divide the property, to how do we build conflict resolution skills in a way where we can each be more, more intentional about how we approach those times when we're
Sure.
at odds.
Now, what are some groups that you would recommend for people, or podcasts or authors?
Yeah,
What are
I
some?
have been curating a list. I can actually send it to you, of different support groups that are out there. As I
Okay.
mentioned, I have a free group on Tuesdays. People need to contact me directly, because we don't want to have any bots, coming in because
Oh
they've
my gosh.
scraped it off.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
If you've
yes.
ever experienced that, that is
Oh
not
my
a fun
gosh.
not a
Yes.
fun moment. And I also curate other support groups and resources that I have seen other women recommend and other people recommend. So I try to be a resource curator as well, broker, so that people can find whatever works for them. I'm not expecting to, be the solution to everybody's problems. And I want people just to have that freedom to choose what resonates for them. But I do offer one-on-one coaching. I Something unique about my coaching is I say I have ridiculously reasonable rates. I charge $1 a minute
That
with a
is.
30-minute minimum. So I'm trying to fill a niche where care is needed, but funds are more limited.
Sure.
I don't want people to not get care because they can't afford it. So
Absolutely. And what's a good way to contact you?
right now, the best way to contact me is actually either on Facebook if people are in our groups
Just
through
DM you on Facebook?
Messenger,
Okay.
or my email is my LLC is called Centraline. So CENTRA. So it's like the British writing of center with the
Mhm.
RE, but you get rid of the E and just put Centraline. So Centraline.
Gotcha. Well, and what people get with you is you've studied this every which way and you've got your certifications, but you also have your personal experiences,
Almost 3 decades. Yep.
which it's not an intellectual exercise for
It
you.
is
It's
not.
you have lived it.
I am
Well,
learning along with everyone,
mhm.
and it's a great journey.
Absolutely. Well, Teresa and I appreciate you in the group and welcome, anything that you want to do in the group. We're going to put you in our directory and hopefully, because there's a lot of women that don't ask for help. Thank you so
Okay.
much for your time.
Thank you for having me.